Bonsoir. I'm Marie-Monique Steckel, and I'm the president of the French Institute Alliance Française. We call it FIAF, and thank you for this wonderful gathering of friends for our annual Sex and Seduction series. We call it the Art of Sex and Seduction. Tonight, we have the great pleasure of welcoming the star of relationships, Esther Perel. Esther Perel is well known for being the voice of reason in modern love. And she is here to discuss her recently published book, The State of Affairs, Rethinking Infidelity. How lucky we are to have Esther Perel here tonight. She just told me that actually it's the third time that she is coming for this Art and Sex and Seduction series at FIAF. So you see, she's a loyal fan, but we are loyal as well, I must say. So I would like also to tell you that she has a podcast which is called Where Should We Begin? And it's in a 10 top podcast in iTunes. And it really is a live couple therapy session. She just showed it to me, and I must tell you, I'm going to look at it because it really, and listen to it, because it really looks fascinating. Esther Perel will be joined on stage by writer and journalist Anand Giridharadas. Anand recently published a book which you can also buy outside, The True American Murder and Mercy in Texas. He's a political analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, and a former columnist for the New York Times. There will be a question and answer session. They will talk, and then you will have the chance to ask all your innermost passionate question. And once the talk is finished, you will be able to go and meet Esther and Anand, and they will sign their books. Now, please join me in welcoming both Esther and Anand. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming. It is a pleasure to be with you all tonight at this incredible moment in our common life in which questions of men and women, love and sex, power and abuse, honor and betrayal are swirling like a storm. It's an honor to sit beside Esther, who is not only a dear friend, not only one of the smartest people I have ever met, but also for me personally, having met her right before I was about to become a father, someone who has provided me extraordinary guidance and extraordinary reminders that the families we create, we often create with dullness and a lack of imagination, and it doesn't have to be that way. When I was a boy growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, if you told me I would one day be involved in a talk titled The Art of Sex and Seduction, I would have asked for the exact address and left Cleveland immediately in search of it. And if you told me the location was the Alliance Française, I would have smiled because it was at another Alliance Française, the one in Bombay, India, in 1975 that my parents met. So the moral of the story is delete your Tinder. Exactly. Delete your Tinder and take a French class. So there's so much to talk about.
Pitch you could do
I know. I was not even paid to do that. There's so much to talk about tonight. Your book, the world beyond your book, all the questions implicated by this amazing book, The State of Affairs, which I read with great embarrassment in many public places in America, people looking at me like I was figuring out how to have one. But I want to start
That's
with...
why more people get the audiobook.
Yeah, exactly. I'm thinking of getting the Bible jacket and just putting it on the outside. One of the great things about hardcovers. I want to start with this moment that we're in. you have a remarkable ability to step back and look at what happens between small groups of people in a bigger context, with the benefit of history, with the benefit of the thousands of hours people have spent in a chair with you telling you their intimate lives. What do you make of this remarkable Me Too moment, and where do you think it's leading us?
It's a watershed moment where you hear a loud roar, an accumulation of all the small and the not so small experiences that men and women have experienced, of belittlement, of oppression, of humiliation, of intimidation, of threats, of harassment, of assault, and of rape. And there is just this is enough. Something else has to happen. And what is it that needs to change? The story of men who have social power and have leveraged it to deal with their sexual insecurities is an old story. These are not sexually powerful men. Sexually powerful men seduce, they don't harass. These are insecure men who leverage their social power. And that is old. I mean, we've gone back to reading things from the 80s and then from the, periods and periods and periods, all the way to 2 or 3 centuries back. And it's like, wow. At the same time, I read a very interesting line that when we think, will this lead to anything? And what about this movement of people coalescing and basically finding a voice and feeling like it's okay to say it because you won't be told, I won't be believed. That in the 1700s, it was what people began to talk about in terms of how the Brits were dealing with the slaves, that actually it led gradually to a change in the law and the legislation. So actually, I do think that noise can be effective. It just needs to be sustainable noise, and it needs to be noise that remains careful of not lumping everything together.
Such as?
Such as you cannot take power out of sex. Power and sexuality are intrinsically related. So is power and relationships. It's a dimension of relationships. When your kid doesn't want to do something, he has power. It's power from the bottom up and power from the top down. But there is a big difference between power to and power over. When I seduce you, I have power to make you gradually want to come to me voluntarily. And that is the essential word, voluntarily. There is no greater power or sovereignty than voluntary surrender. Power over is humiliation and threat and demeaning and degradation. And there's a difference between a compliment and a degradation. But when we are constantly talking about the degradation, we still need to remember the importance of the compliment.
One of the interesting, when you talk about power and sex, one of the interesting debates that's happening right now is about the workplace and whether there is any place for even consensual romance, flirtation, relationships in the workplace. And there are some people who say, if you have power differentials of any kind, consent is kind of unknowable, we can never ascertain it, therefore let's keep it entirely out of the workplace. You tend to have a different view. Can you talk about where you land on whether we need to banish all of that, all sexuality from the workplace? Could we?
And then what, go with robots? I mean, where exactly are people still supposed to meet at this point? You can't eradicate the ambiguities, the tensions, the unspoken of relationships. You can legislate it up the wazoo. This is a living animal thing, this thing called relationships. It is filled with mishaps, etc. At the moment we decided in the West that we were going to democratize sexuality and to become more promiscuous, that you were no longer just going to marry and have sex for the first time. Actually, with today you marry and you stop having sex with others. That from that moment on, we were putting ourselves in a bed of all kinds of situations. That said, that is not at all the same thing as licensing for harassment and assault. But every situation has an element of power. And you could say that for a long time, women leveraged their sexual power to rise and get more social power. People have used power for their benefit to compensate for the spaces where they lack power. Is it possible to have a relationship with somebody that you work with and that is clear of power? No, but why would you? Is it possible that people can fall in love at work and live a life together afterwards? Absolutely. Is it not a good idea if you are the boss that you go out with your underling? Probably. It's not a good idea because it's complicated. But people have done complicated relationships forever. People have gone with their muses, they've gone with their students, they've gone with their staff. People have. And not always was it just an exercise of power. And sometimes we also have to still talk about love. And love has sometimes had the force to want to go across borders and barriers that you were not meant to go. And that force is also something that motivates us. And so that's my answer. But I'm not a legislator, I'm a psychologist.
We wish you were a legislator, obviously. You can literally replace any of them and it would be an improvement. Let's talk about consent. I was at this amazing performance this weekend, and this very pioneering artist kind of started by saying, you know, a lot of people think this stuff happening on college campuses where consent is getting very explicit and can I now look at your shoulder kind of thing is too far and is unsexy. But he said, but I want to prove otherwise. And he did this kind of routine, kind of trying to make it show that it can be sexy to say, can I sit next to you? Can I now sit 2 inches closer to you? And it was a kind of funny thing. But I wonder, you talk so much about keeping, exactly, thank you. That was my oblique way of asking that. You talk so much about how do you keep the spice alive? How do you have mystery? How do you have the unknowable have a space in relationships? How does that square with the other good thing that is happening, which is consent getting more explicit and people coming to a clear understanding of when it actually occurs?
You know, I think there's something about the issue of consent that is also a little bit cultural, you know. A relationship is a process of iteration and reiteration. You do something, you watch, you check for the consequence, you notice, you're not sure, you try a little bit, it doesn't work. It's called pacing. You know, you wait to get a sign, you get a sign, then you're not sure, was it really the sign you thought it was? Then you think, yes, maybe it is. Then you realize that it was a sign, but not the one you thought. And then, you know, that whole dance like that.
Some people are literally in the middle of that right now. This is like a date that they're having.
And sometimes somebody needs to say, stop, enough, not interested. Or sometimes you have consent, but it was not wanted. You can have consent and unwanted, you know, and that is part of the complication of the experience, is that you realize in the middle, I'm not so sure I wanted this, even though I said yes.
Did you see this amazing short story that's gone viral over the weekend?
No.
I'm sure many of you saw it, Cat Person. This amazing story in the New Yorker that is entirely about when there is consent, but it's unwanted.
Yes, I mean, you know, anybody in this room who has had many experiences since they were 16 or 17 has a list, those that make you smile and those that make you say, what was I thinking? You know, where was I? But if the day we decided we wanted that freedom comes with sometimes consent that is unwanted. At the same time, I think that the more experience you have with other people, with members of the sex that you are drawn to, and from little on, the more you have known the experiences of the other, the more you have piled up with boys and girls in the grass and talked about things like that, the better you are attuned at reading the signs. If you come after years of ignorance and desert, and suddenly you have to deal with consent, you are bringing an Asperger mentality to seduction. And how do you read the face? And how do you know? You've done everything online. You've been hiding the whole time. You haven't really learned to look at eyes. You don't know what the experience is on the other side. You know, it's that then puts consent as the ultimate gate rather than intuition, sensibility, a sense of aesthetic, a sense of interpersonal intelligence. Those things also guide our interactions, not just the big gate, yea, nay.
The screen generation becomes worrisome
Yes,
the light
because
of that.
once you have that kind of digital communication as the primary communication, it flattens things. I mean, it's great. I mean, I love to text, but it flattens things. You know, you just don't have that many emotions
You're not getting
for
that
all the
cycle.
nuances of human experience and human feelings. So now I come and you sit this way, and I'm not really sure anymore. Is this a face that says, keep talking, or is this a face that said, shut the fuck up?
I'm trying to keep it completely unreadable. That's you read it correctly.
Right. So now I'm waiting for consent. Now I need a clear, visible sign. You know, nobody
This
wants
has gotten
to.
weird. But it always does with us. Yeah.
Nobody wants coercion. I mean, has to be clear. Nobody wants to wake up the next day and say, ugh. What happened to me? What happened to me? You know? And nobody wants to be lying there half drunk and drugged out with somebody who takes advantage of us. And nobody wants a man who confuses sex and rape. And those things have to be established. Once we are very clear on that, then you need to still bring people back to an experience of relational intelligence so that they can be in interaction with people and not freak out when the signs are not clear, and learn to read and decode and do that which people have done for centuries.
So I want to turn to the book now. You know, if you write a book about infidelity and it's a book that has a compassionate approach to the topic, you're obviously highly motivated and willing to face serious blowback. The great American writer Michael Lewis once said, writers write because they feel the world has misperceived something. So what did you feel the world had misperceived?
Oh, that's a beautiful line. What did I feel the world had misperceived? I think that when I deal with experiences of human life that are like in my office, you know, I've been a couples therapist for 35 years almost. I've the last years only seen couples with infidelity. I've seen the gamut. I haven't seen all yet, but I've seen a lot worldwide. And I'm thinking this experience is so complex. It's really a vortex. It's messy. It really can't be summarized in black and white. It can't just be a victim and a perpetrator. It can't just be, you know, a good person and a bad person. And this conversation is wrong. Not that it is inaccurate, but it is incomplete, and it leaves out, you know, a host of other understandings for the complexity of this experience. Can I ask a question to this audience? Just so this is the misperception. Don't answer yet, but imagine this. I'm asking you, have you been touched by the experience of infidelity in your life? Either because you were the child of a parent who fell in love with someone else and left, or who had affairs, or one affair. Either because you are the offspring of an illicit love, either because you're the friend that somebody has been crying to for days now, and either because you are the confidant of people who are in the throes of one, or either because you are resisting and you know that there is something really intensely pulling you, or you are one of the three primary protagonists in the triangle. How many of you would say you've been touched by the experience of infidelity in your lives? Okay. This is the misperception. The story is written...
In fairness, this is a French institute, so...
So...
Adjust for
in
inflation.
Fairness,
Yeah.
I have now done 30 talks across America, and the Americans don't cheat any less than the French. So...
Just less sexily.
In fairness... with more guilt. In fairness, this is intergenerational, this is systemic. Infidelity has accompanied marriage since marriage was invented, and it is described as if it is a few bad apples. And I think that it lacks the compassion and the understanding of that phenomenon, so that it becomes shrouded in secrecy and in shame all the time. And that, to me, when I see something, I think it's from where I come from, that where I just feel like the judgment galore and people are just dismissed, you know, all of them. The only ones that get a little sympathy sometimes is the children, but none of the other three primary adults. I just thought we can do better. We need a new conversation for the oldest sin.
One of the profoundest things in the book for me is, although on every page it's about infidelity, on every page it seems to me not about infidelity on a deeper level. Mm-hmm. And you reject what you call the symptom model, which is infidelity is always a symptom of a bad relationship. You think that's an outdated and a very narrow view. And what struck me on page after page is that you think we are all living wrong in a variety of ways that have nothing to do with our relationships. Oh my God. We don't have enough friends. We don't have enough community. We're putting all this pressure on this one relationship, in part because we don't have the kinds of other social connections that people used to. Can you talk about how this is in some ways a book about how we live more broadly?
I really like that you see that. It is true that I always say this is a book about relationships through the lens of infidelity. What better way to understand relationships, resilience, strength, rebuilding, etc., than to actually go digging in one of the worst crises. But in writing this, to understand modern infidelity, you have to understand modern marriage. Because infidelity has existed, but it changes with the model of marriage. Pain is pain, but the way you narrate your pain, the way you make meaning of it, has to do with your expectations as well. So I read a lot about what has happened to the couple of today. And, here is this unit that has relationship expectations at an all-time high. Never have we expected more from this one unit. That is meant to give you all the base needs of survival and companionship and children and economic support. Then it's meant to give you belonging and transcendence and meaning. And then it's meant to give you self-fulfillment and passion and all of these things. And then it's on top of it, in this country, it has to be a social welfare state of two. It's like, and this unit, not only is it meant to be this one and only, which, by the way, used to refer to God, not to people, the soulmates. The soulmate was not your partner, This was for the divine. And then, at the same time, in the village, you kind of heard every argument of every couple. You often knew way too much. But now, your friends can come and tell you that they're divorcing, and you didn't see it coming. So you put this unit that is so much expected from it, and that you also under-resource it, and it feels so isolated. And something is not working. And then you add infidelity to it. So when you now cheat on me, you, my best friend, my trusted confidant, my passionate lover, my one and only, the one for whom I deleted my apps, the one who cured me of my case of FOMO, the one who I called my soulmate, when you do this to me, and we were everything for each other, where do I go? So this becomes one of the most isolating experiences. People can tell you that they're divorced. They will not tell you that they have experienced infidelity. It's the big shame. And if you cheated on me, not only do I have the shame of you cheating on me, but on top of it, I have the shame of not being able to tell anybody, because the only thing people will tell me is throw the dog on the curb. So now I'm really caught. And all I saw was people who are living, for any other crisis, you get support. For this one, you are doubly isolated. And I saw this in the context of what does it mean when you want everything from one person? What does it mean when you can't talk truth? Couples are not telling the truth. That's why I did the podcast. I wanted a place where people can actually hear truth-telling around relationships, not fictitious curated lives on social. The real story. And then from there, I think we can do better. We can take this in a different direction. That's it. That's what I see when I look at society. I see, the number one public health crisis is loneliness at this point in this country, and at the same time, this experience compounds it. And I see that people still want to be in relationships. People still want families, they want relationships. They don't want to lose themselves in the relationships, but they want the relationships. And so it becomes really an examination of modern living.
Yeah. And part of what happens when you let all those other relationships wither and you do gamble everything on that one person, and that one person is now the village, is that another very big theme of the book is an almost excessive closeness develops that you keep writing about. And it comes again and again in the book in different ways. You have this great line, fire needs air. And when everybody else is gone and that person is the one and only, an almost sibling-like relationship often forms in the people you are talking about and thinking about. Can you talk about how an excess of closeness, an excess of comfort, an excess of familiarity can actually get people into a very bad place?
So, you know, this is actually more for me when I try to understand the relationship between love and desire. They relate, but sometimes they also conflict. And herein lies the mystery of eroticism, right? What fuels love? That I know you, that you are predictable to me, that you are reliable, that we have low conflict, that I feel secure with you, that I can open up to you. All of those things are not necessarily the same things that fuel desire, by which I want to actually not know you. I still want to discover you. I still want you to be curious about me. I still want to have some sense of mystery. I still want some element of unpredictability. You know, everything that eroticism thrives on sometimes is what family life defends against. And so when people would come to me and say, in first book, in Mating in Captivity, people would say to me, we love each other very much, we have no sex. And I had to begin to understand that. And now people were coming to me and say, I love my partner, I'm having an affair. The ones who are in a mess and really resent their relationships and now having an affair, it's kind of, what's to write about that? It's kind of, it's been said, you know. Either you want to leave, either you want vengeance, either you're doing a reaction.
But the happy people.
The happy people, that was something that I was really, it wasn't happy people. It's people that are in satisfying relationships, people who are in happy relationships. It's been looked at as happy people. And then I began to see the longing. So then the question becomes, longing for what? Why do people, after years, risk losing everything that they themselves have built, the rules they themselves have set up? For what? What is it that they're missing? And something happens when you are with your best friend and you are in a relationship with your confidant and you become interchangeable roles to create a family and all these things that make for happy relationships, but something becomes de-eroticized sometimes. And then I start to hear people who say, it's been 15 years and all I have been is wife and mother and daughter to my parents. Where is the woman? And then you don't know anymore how to find the woman inside this unit. You love this unit, but this unit is predicated on a part of you that has not been there for so long. And so suddenly you have this thing called an affair. And this is not to be an apologist. This is just one of the multiple stories, but it's such a common one. And suddenly, for the first time, you're doing something that is just for you. That's what you're doing. You're not cheating. You know you are cheating too. You know you are betraying. You know you are lying, deceiving. You're doing a lot of things. But what you're doing for you is a complete different thing. What you're doing for you is reconnecting with lost parts of yourselves. You know, with a different version of you, with the sense of aliveness. The issue of infidelity is less about the cheating and the betrayal as it is about the transgression. It's about the breaking out of one's own, you know. Now that can be my insecurity, my narcissism, my life, my beloved life. But it is a transgressive act. It is a resounding act of rebellion and entitlement. And entitlement. It is totally a selfish act. You're doing this just for you. It's very clear. This is not a collective thinking, one bit. But what you're experiencing is not that. What you are experiencing is an experience of desire. Affairs are not about sex. Affairs are about desire. Desire for connection, desire for intensity, desire for physical touch, desire for for feeling alive, desire. You can have a whole affair with no sex, just imagining it, and it is just as intense and as passionate as if you had actually had the act. It is more enchantment than performance.
So I just caught a glimpse of an Argentinian friend of mine in the audience. So I immediately thought of the topic of jealousy. Jealousy is one of these things that, and there are many examples of this in your book, things that concepts that have a low reputation that you sort of redeem in the book. Jealousy became a bad word in modern times.
It disappeared from the magazines here in the 70s.
And you think it actually has some constructive use in keeping people together. So give us your pitch on the redemption of jealousy.
The redemption of jealousy. It's very interesting. Sometimes I ask in the States for people to free associate about the word infidelity or affair or tryst or adventure or love affair or fuck buddy or, the whole gamut. And I can get a list of 60 words, and jealousy will not feature. But the main one that rarely features is love. When I'm in Argentina, among the first 5, you have love, jealousy, passion, and revenge. And then I say to the Argentinians, well, how come you don't put lying on the top of your list? They say, we've been doing that since the Spanish arrived. And it's just, that's a given. That comes with the territory. So jealousy is an erotic wrath. That's one of the ways of looking at it. You got to go to the operas to understand the force of jealousy. Jealousy means it can only happen for something that you have. Envy is from something that you didn't have. But jealousy is for something that you have that is being taken away and diverted to this third person. And I want it back. And sometimes that jealousy makes me fight for you. And sometimes in that jealousy, I'm not talking pathological jealousy now for a moment, but in that jealousy, I lose some of my pride, but I reconnect with my fire. And I reconnect with the part in me that actually lets you know that I do want you after sometimes for years being rather lazy and complacent and uninterested and indifferent. It comes on the heels of that. Today, sometimes when people are jealous, we prefer to say they're traumatized. It is the new language. Rather than to, sometimes I say to people, you're jealous. You have obsessions, you have this, you have images, you're seeing them, you want to experience what the other one did experience. This is good old jealousy, It's not a fun feeling one bit, but it is part of the experience of love. It is intrinsic to love, jealousy. It's not just a trauma. There is trauma too, but everything these days emphasizes the traumatic nature. Now, if I am in erotic wrath, then I am fighting for my partner, for the person that I love, that I want to bring back. That is a different way of fighting than being victim. You're empowered when you come from that place. You're not just in a disempowered victim place. And in the rejection and in the triangulation of the adulterous plot, I get reignited with that part of me, and I'm going to go and reclaim you and put my claws on the territory and all the possessiveness that comes with that. And it does reconnect people with a part of their erotic self. It is part of the erotic, that darker corner of the erotic.
I think she redeemed jealousy. Would you agree?
I did okay?
Let's talk about men.
Yes.
Because men need a reboot. There are a lot of men in your book, people you've seen therapeutically. Probably none of them. I don't think there are any Harvey Weinsteins in your book.
There are a few good narcissists
in
my book.
But I'm talking about truly evil monsters.
No.
There's a lot of men in your book who are lost, confused, trapped between old and new ideas of male power, sexuality, work, just lost. And I wonder, in this moment when we're having this conversation, you quote a colleague who says, men are struggling to fit into, quote, the shrinking maneuvering space between being a wimp and being a rapist. Do you think we're doing enough to teach men who they need to be on the other side of patriarchy?
No, I think that...
How do we do that?
I think that, first of all, the life of women will not change until the men come along. And if we're going to talk sexually for a moment, the same way that we worked very hard to finally change this notion that female sexuality is inherently masochistic, I think we have to also challenge the notion that male sexuality is inherently violent or aggressive or predatory. I think the predatory fear is at the heart of male sexuality, but not the inherent predatory nature. That's a very big difference. Because if you can put it like that, then you can teach men how to be sexual without being aggressive or violent or hurtful. And the only way they know that, the only way you know that you are not being a predator is by the response of the other person. It is the other person's pleasure that tells you, you're not hurting me, you're pleasing me. And that's what makes male sexuality so deeply dependent and relational, contrary to anything we think. We look at male sexuality as if it's some biological force. They're always ready in search of an outlet. It just spurts out of them. No, it's like it is so relational, and it is part of that dependence and part of that relationality of male sexuality that is so troubling that it needs to be squashed by all these power maneuvers. You know, that way, I can do this in front of you, I can completely expose myself, and now I do not have to fear your rejection anymore, and now I don't have to fear my lack of performance anymore, and now I don't have to worry about what your experience is like. I am owning this space, and you are my captive audience. This is all compensation for the degree to which this dependence exists. So I think that boys at the age of 3 are touched less than girls by their own parents. We still collude in this notion that we can feminize these boys if we leave them too sensitive and too vulnerable. And then we begin the masculinization of these boys, the making of men, because we are born women, but we become men. Man's identity is constantly having to prove itself. I'm a real man. And now we're going to start working on disconnecting boys from their vulnerability, from their connections to others, from their sensibility. We're going to make them fearless and autonomous and competitive and all of that stuff. And then they want to know, how do I experience connection that, in which I don't have to use aggression from that place. So in the book, what you see is a lot of men who struggle with aggression, actually, and who split it off. And so they live love-lust splits. They have a place for their aggression with women with whom they have a different emotional connection. Sometimes they devalue them, but not always. And then they have the partner with whom they live their life. And that is a very traditional split for infidelity. The answer could be
we have a few minutes left, so I want to, these will be a little rapid round and start getting your own questions ready. I want to ask you about, we're living in such a remarkable era in terms of the family changing. And, because it's a dark time right now for many of us, we also forget how much progress there's been on the rights of gay people, of transgender people, et cetera, in this very same era.
And fathers.
And fathers.
The biggest change of men's life is the invention of modern fatherhood.
So I wonder, when you think about same-sex marriage and that revolution, when you think about our growing understanding of gender, how is it changing the relationships of traditional heterosexual couples? Is it changing the institution for the rest of us in ways that you're seeing in
When I was here last time with Dan Savage, he said straight people are living the lives that queer people used to live, and queer people are beginning to live the lives of the heterosexuals. And I thought there's something to this comment. I think that when you're not part of the norm, the heterosexual norm in general, you are more isolated, but you are also sometimes a lot more creative. You get to actually invent your own norms. You're not beholden to a system that is telling you how to live every step. So I think that definitely the conversation about monogamy has been led by a lot of same-sex couples, particularly gay couples, until until recently, and I think in most cases still, the conversation on monogamy and the negotiation about monogamy in straight couples is 5 words. I catch you, you dead. That is it. That's the chat. That is the entire, and yet we can't assume it anymore. There's no way we can just assume monogamy at this moment. We have to negotiate it. I think that the whole notion of the fluidity, by thinking about trans people, by understanding the difference between sex and gender, by understanding the difference between who you're making love to and who you're making love as. That these are really categories that needed to be opened up. All these concepts, we use the same words, but their meanings have fundamentally shifted. The fact that when on the level of the family, on the level of the men, I really do think fatherhood is the big, big change. And if you gave 6 months of paternity leave, you would have a different story later on. There's no doubt about that. That's just the beginning of this one.
So, you mentioned these conversations about monogamy. So in the book, towards the end, you encourage people to maybe overcome their squeamishness about having the talk, which in your case means the talk about...
It's not the birds and the bees.
Right, exactly. It's like the stage 2 of the talk. And the talk that you describe is a talk of saying, let's not inherit a template of a monogamous relationship that our great-grandparents used, but let's actually have a conversation about what are the boundaries of this relationship. And the conclusion of that conversation may be, let's do what our great-grandparents did, and it may be, let's have an open relationship, and it may be something in between. Do you think we are trending, however slowly, in a direction where everybody is going to have some variant of an open relationship, or at least a negotiated monogamy, or do you think that monogamy is going to have a tenacity to outmaneuver those pressures?
Do you think that virginity, which used to be the big boundary before, is the precursor to the conversation about monogamy today? Forever, the thought of having sex before marriage was inconceivable, shameful, ostracizing, inconceivable, not accepted. Today, in the West, it is a fairly accepted norm. Monogamy used to be one person for life. Today, monogamy is one person at a time. Oh. And people comfortably tell you that they are monogamous in all their relationships. Oh. Plural. This word has already undergone an amazing makeover, So I think that what we talk about today around sexual exclusivity is in the continuation of the conversation that began around virginity. We wanted freedom before, and now some people would like freedom from within. Or at least we want to have a sense of what that's like. But here is the challenge of the conversation about monogamy. If I have had 15 years of sexual nomadism, and then finally I picked a person, and this person is my one and only, it's the one for whom I was willing to put all the others aside, how am I going to have a conversation with this person about the fact that I may still have attractions to others? Just that. We're not talking about being with other partners, just the notion that the fact that you are mine or I'm with you and we are us doesn't mean that my entire erotic self has been subsumed by you. It still exists independently. And so the conversation can't take place because it instantly means I'm not enough.
And do you tell people what's the best way to initiate that very hard conversation?
Yes, exactly that. I said, come on. It's like the desire.
You just drink a lot? Like, how do you actually have that? How do you...
When you see, what's it like today when you see people? Do you still have the same kind of thoughts that you used to have before? Do you find yourself censoring your thoughts when you see other people? Because do you feel guilty when you have a fantasy about somebody else? Would you ever share your fantasies about someone else with me? When you sit on the subway and you notice this person and you think these things, do you wonder what it would have been like if you were still single today? It's a chat. It's not a threatening conversation that I am not enough because you have interest in others. It's not, are we allowed to be an open relationship? The conversation has to be open, not the relationship. What is open is the conversation. And when the conversation is open, in fact, people are not nearly as inclined to go so far. Because who wants to leave a place in which you feel free? You come home voluntarily. It's the places that are constraining you that make you want to go outside. So I always say to people, don't open up your relationship, open up the conversation. Don't pretend that this is not happening. You know, when you're seeing this movie and you see this actor, you know, it's like that. But it is an acknowledgement that the fact that we chose each other doesn't mean that we are not still sexual as an entity sovereignly on our own. And from there, you can then start to talk, you know, what is your value system? What would you like to do? What kind of generosity do we want to have with each other? Do we want a relationship? For some people, non-monogamy, consensual non-monogamy is part of a value system. I want stability and commitment, but I also want freedom and self-expression. And I want to be able to do this in a way that is not going to threaten us and make us be unfaithful. I actually want us to have more honesty, more transparency, and therefore maybe more longevity than my boomer parents did when they did the old model and split up after the fracas.
So your homework tonight, I want all of you to consider, at a minimum, having one of these conversations. If you're in a relationship, ask one of these questions.
It's a very
see what happens.
intimate conversation between partners to open each other's erotic minds.
And the Institute will then take a survey of how many of you ended up breaking up as a result and how many of you actually deepened your relationship, and we'll do some big data analysis.
I mean, don't you think people open their bodies, but they don't open their minds to each other? It's often sometimes very strange, you know?
If anything is true about this moment, it is that. It's time for your questions. I think we have some microphone runners. I can't see them because of the lights.
Can we get a little more light in the house, please? Ah, voila.
So just find the microphone runners, and there we go. And sorry, if the next microphone person can just get it to tee up the next person while we're waiting. Go ahead.
Well, from what you just said, it requires a lot of...
Sorry, one more note. These have to be real questions, very short, ending in a question mark, and I will cut you off ruthlessly if they're not.
It requires a lot of self-esteem and trust to have like an open discussion with your partner of what you just said. How would you handle that?
Yes, it requires a certain level of confidence to be able to have those conversations. It requires a vulnerability. It requires intimacy. It requires all the things that we want to have in our intimate relationships. Yeah. And you develop it over time. You try, you see the response, you read about it. It's an integrated conversation as part of something else. It's not like it's not the talk. It's part of many talks. And in that conversation, you sometimes say, you know, that's very scary to me. I feel very insecure about that. I would hate it. It taps into a deep fear of mine. And you want a partner who then says, I get it, you know, and that opening up of that vulnerability of what am I to you? Who am I to you? Am I enough to you? Can somebody else take my place? Is part of modern love. The day we replaced arranged marriages with no choice to free choice marriages, in which basically the relationship lasts as long as the quality of the relationship demands it, we have put ourselves in a more vulnerable place. Yes, that is the model that we are in at this moment.
Next question. Hold the microphone very close.
Where is it?
Okay, I have the
Okay, the microphone runners, you guys are in charge of making sure you tee up people.
So you talked a lot about, I'm over here if you wanted to see. You talked a lot about it being different today, that our partner is someone that we rely on for everything and that we count on to be everything for us. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, is that inherently bad? Or is there a way to have that, but to also balance it out, and how you would recommend that we do that?
Where are you?
Here. Hi.
Good. You know, you're not going to hear me say good and bad like this. It's an interesting evolution. It's an amazing evolution. It puts relationships in a state of a tremendous burden. No, I do not think personally that one person can satisfy you with everything. I think that the marriages, even the best marriages, may have certain things that they will never provide you with. And then the question is, what do you do? And maybe you say, I make a compromise. It's a choice, and with a choice comes a loss. But we do know that relationships that are nurtured by many other friends, mentors, families, a community that live in an ecosystem do a lot better than relationships where people have only each other as an echo chamber. We don't think echo chambers are particularly good in society as a whole, and they're not particularly good in a couple either. You need another point of view. You need to be able to go and vent about your partner to somebody else who tells you, I've got the same situation. Now let's go have a drink, you know? And then you go home and then you feel better because you were able to commiserate. And it normalizes you. It says this is part of life, this is living, and you get ups and downs and frustrations and moments when you think I can't do another day like this, and then the next morning you wake up and you say, I'm so happy to wake up next to you. And you go in this kind of a thing. The insularity of modern coupledom, to me, I think is complicated. People are constantly saying, do other people go through this? What's life like at the neighbor's house? You know, am I alone with this? How have other people dealt with this? And instead of an abundance of resources of how one does that. So that is my point of view. But I think the research at this point is backing this. Calibration of expectations, diversification of relationships are two essential components that will strengthen relationships.
Someone in this zone? Who has a mic?
I have a mic. In chapter 11 in your book, you're talking about the love and lust split.
Yes.
Is it curable, and how long it takes in your experience?
Chapter 11, it's like when people begin to know better than me where things are. That's a real...
It's also the bankruptcy chapter.
Oh my
so.
God. The love-lust split is it's not uncommon. It's not so easy to explain to you in 2 minutes. You really, this is one of the few times that I would say you need to go read about it. It's one of the most difficult things to change, I have to say. The love-lust split, the inability to integrate desire and
Maybe just define the phenomenon and just like say the observation.
It came from Freud, you know, early on, where he loves, he can't desire, he can't lust. It's a split. It's a split that men and women have, by which they find it virtually, you know, it's a split that comes from many sources, so we're not going to go there. But the notion, when I see a person who deeply loves their partner, is deeply intimate, connected, is affectionate, but can touch here, but can't touch there. There, it becomes sexual, and it's like the Berlin Wall comes up. It's ironclad. It's just, it feels taboo. It's when sex feels taboo with the person that you love, either because they have become overly familial, they have become too parental for you, and we do not want sex in the family. You know, so when a certain kind of attachment, a certain kind of connection sometimes becomes so familiarized that it makes sex impossible with that same person. That's the love-lust split. And it's very difficult to change, I have to say.
And Sigmund Freud will also be signing books afterward.
Hi.
And it's painful on the other side. Yes.
My question, you said something earlier, I'm right here in the front, that fire needs air.
Yes.
So I am complaining to my girlfriends about men not trying to talk to us in person and so forth. And how do I encourage my male friends to go and make a compliment to a woman and go ask a woman out or start a conversation in person? Because I've tried to start encouraging them, but I still can't motivate them enough.
Because they're all doing it online?
Yes, I mean,
Yeah.
they see plenty of beautiful women out. Can't you just say you're beautiful? It's not about making you uncomfortable, it's about making a compliment.
I think we need to take trips to Argentina.
I'm going to leave that one right there. Where's the next microphone?
I mean, that's really in a nutshell. Is you? You can't just say it. It's really a cultural thing. You know, I went to give a talk at Wharton last week, and this young student is waiting for me on the street, and he's opening the door of the taxi, and he's opening the door of the building. And I said to him, enjoy it while it lasts, because the next one's going to tell you, what, you think I can't open the door myself? I said, you hit the right person. Be galant as much as you want with me.
Gentleman in the front.
Based on your research, would you say that the motives for infidelity are different from men and women? I grew up in Latin America, and there's I would say, a myth, whereas men look for sex, whereas women look for connection or emotion. Are their motives different?
Yes, that's such a great question. So the traditional stereotypic view is twofold. One is men cheat for sex because they're bored, they need novelty, variety, and all of that, and women cheat because they're lonely and hungry for intimacy. Mm-hmm. And the second part, of course, of this very same thing is, let's really remember, since you are from Latin America as well, that this conversation has never been a gender equal affair. I mean, men have practically had a license to cheat worldwide, and women still have 9 countries where they can be killed just for straying. So when we say that women cheat when they're miserable and when they want out, is it because that's really what motivates them to cheat, or is it because the consequences have been so dire? Ostracism, destitution, pregnancy, mortality. You bet she needs to really be miserable before she takes the risk. He didn't have, the consequences were so massively different that of course he could do it for much more frivolous reasons. We don't have a clue what women want. We only know what women value and what women have been compliant to do. We have never known what women really want. You really have to go look in their affairs, actually, sometimes to know what they truly want. But I think that once the consequences will be equal, we will know if the motives are fundamentally different. My personal research, when I do research, it's really clinical research. It's 1,500 letters after the TED Talk. It's that. I am not an empirical researcher of the other kind. But no, actually, this notion, you know, yes, there are certain men who really just want to go and have sex, but even hit and run sex has meaning. I don't believe sex is ever just sex, especially when you want to strip it of everything. That's a very different way, you know, to make something mean nothing takes a lot of feeling. You understand? So when you go to the hooker, there is a whole story behind that. What it is that you always ask, what is this you're paying her for? And sometimes you don't just pay her to come, you pay her to leave. You know, it's a different thing. What is it that you're looking for there? What is the story? So the act doesn't tell me anything. The meaning and the story will tell me what is going on.
Yeah, well, I'm from New Jersey. I'll leave it up to you to figure out what that means. but you know, I get what you're saying.
I'm not French, people, just so you know, despite the accent.
I get what you're saying about the value of openness and communication and so forth, but what about mystery and intrigue and novelty and unpredictability? I mean, surely there has to be a balance between these things. And you know, would you comment? Are there certain areas, or how do you maintain that in the face of this drive for total transparency?
Beautiful, beautiful. So my whole first book, Mating in Captivity, is exactly about that. It is about the mystery. It is about the intrigue. It is about, you know, the opposite. It is about privacy, actually, the privacy that exists between secrecy and transparency. When I am talking, I don't necessarily think about it in we need to put everything out there and it has to be all out in the open. I think that there is a way to play with this. The concept that is really behind this is the playfulness. It's not about you know, an inventory of my fantasies. It's just that there is a certain for some people, there's a certain deep intimacy in just kind of saying, you know, if you were not with me, where would you be? What would your life look like? Who's the one you would be drawn to today? You know, if you met me today, would you still be interested? It's those kind of conversations sometimes. It's not about putting everything out there, and I am very much in line with your way of thinking. So it speaks to me, but none of this is for everybody. I think the most important thing in this whole conversation is there isn't a one-size-fits-all. You know, for some people, predictability is about as much as they've ever hoped to have in their lives, because they grew up in chaos. They grew up in massive unpredictability. And to have a secure, predictable, reliable landscape in front of them is major, more than they ever dreamed about. So for some people, it's the other side that they're longing for, the unknown, the exploration, the discovery, all of that. But not everybody wants to live in that place. And the problem is that sometimes you have one of each in the same couple.
We have time for 2 more questions, so obviously
I will
make
make
these
my
world
answer
class.
shorter.
From some of your earliest lectures, and I've been following you for a long time, but you speak a lot about desire. And I guess I wanted to, you know, why is the forbidden...
So erotic.
Why is the forbidden so erotic?
Right. Can we do something and take a few and then see if
Let's
there's
do
a theme?
it. Why is it forbidden so erotic?
Yeah.
We got fast microphone action here. Okay, we got one more.
Move
The back.
there, oops, and then we just move it. Yeah, and then we come to you. Yeah. No, there's a few already there.
Okay,
Yeah.
do I ask?
Okay.
Yeah. I just wanted to know what would be your advice to not repeat or to like be in a certain mindset at the beginning of a relationship so as to start anew, and like what would be the best steps
To not do it
engage?
again?
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. Go back. No,
The
go
back
back.
and-
So
Yeah, that woman there. Yeah, go ahead.
okay. I'm hearing you say that we have to be honest about the limitations. I'm way up here in the back. I'm hearing you say that we have to be honest about the limitations of monogamy. And sometimes being honest and having that conversation can actually make those limitations more tolerable. But I guess that once you get past that, my question is, what about a workable model of non-monogamy? In your experience, have relationships been able to flourish when, whatever you want to call it, infidelity or polyamory has been acted upon for a sustained period of time?
Okay, good. Last one. Yeah.
How do you rebuild that trust once you've had infidelity?
Great, great. Okay. Let me try to... why is the forbidden so erotic? That's the whole story of Adam and Eve, isn't it? There is something in breaking rules that gives you a feeling of freedom and power. And when you do something that you're expected to do, sometimes it's wonderful, and sometimes it starts to feel like it's compliance, especially in the realm of sex, especially actually for women. Once it's what she's supposed to, she often doesn't want to, because then it feels like she's just doing what she's been socialized to do, pleasing. The forbidden is the no, you know, when your little child runs and takes something and then looks at you with utter glee because they know that they've done something that they're not supposed to, they feel on top of the world for a moment. It's that, you know, but it's not just in the realm of affairs. In general, there is something about leaps, transgressions, that is enlivening. That is the easy word for it. How do you rebuild trust? Slowly, so over time, with enormous affirmations from your partner that, one, that they experience deep remorse for hurting you, that they feel guilty for what they've done. Maybe they don't feel guilty for the affair itself, but they feel guilty for what it did to you. It's two things. That they are able to be accountable and take responsibility, and that they're able to show you that they deeply care about the relationship that you have. To just not do it again is not really going to breed trust. To have a surveillance system with passwords and GPS doesn't necessarily breed trust. Totalitarianism is not the best system for trust. But to really feel deeply affirmed again, to reclaim your value, to feel once again that you are really important in that person's life, and to reclaim your sense of wholeness so that you're not just the victim of the affair, that is where you begin to bring trust again. You know, trust is a leap of faith. It's your ability to live with the unknown. If you have to know all the details, you can't trust. So you need, what you want to trust is that your partner is back with you, and this is where he or she wants to be. How you negotiate non-monogamy, there are many ways that many people that have monogamish or consensually open relationships or ethical non-monogamy or polyamory. I think that more and more it is one of the many models of an entrepreneurial spirit that wants to have a certain freedom and a certain lack of structure and things like that. Now, I was asked earlier, I was on Terry Gross today, and she was also asking me, can they work? And I just said, it's very interesting. I spent 20 years working with intermarriage, interracial, intercultural, interreligious couples. And at the time, people kept saying that doesn't work because they were new, because they were breaking a norm, because they were marrying outside of the traditional mandate, and because they would never speak about it out loud. And when you are the only one in the neighborhood, I bet you have more pressure on you. How many open relationships actually speak about it openly? The majority hide it. They hide it because they anticipate the judgment. I think success and the workability of things also has to do with the mainstreaming of something. The more isolated and hidden it is, the more likely that it will be problematic. In general, when people are innovators of all kinds in life, but especially in relationships, those who do it well, do it very well. But it's not for everybody to succeed at it. This is what happens to innovators. The ones who do it well are surpassing in quality maybe the relationships that have existed until today. But the vast majority may not be able to do it yet, or at all, or doesn't want to. And I think that kind of, did I miss anyone?
I think you answered more than any of us could hope for. I think we're living in this moment that is so extraordinary in so many ways. In one really big, obvious, horrible way, and then in...
Can I ask you something? I'm sorry to interject this, and I hope it's not but I find it so interesting that everybody keeps talking about the Weinstein era. Why don't we start the story with the Trump era?
I think you're right.
Isn't that where the story began?
I think you're right. Many of you probably saw today a big press conference where 3 of Trump's accusers, I shouldn't say told their story because they were actually retelling their story. And they were essentially telling the story of how their story got ignored the first time and maybe second and fourth and fifth time they told it. It's extraordinary that the President of the United States has impunity on this thing that is purging so many other male predators from all kinds of other positions of power. As we navigate that story, the story of our changing families, the story of this new and very powerful female rage, the story of infidelity.
It's not new. It's just coming out.
Right.
It's
Fair.
so not new. It's just finally like, oof.
I think we are very blessed to have you as a guide to these times. So please join me in thanking Esther Perel.
Thank you.
And I think we're signing some books, so come join us and say hi.